Hey Homegoings fam, Myra here with a quick note before we start the episode. Public Media Giving Day is right around the corner. What's that? I'm so glad you asked. It's a time to celebrate what public media gives to us all. If you love public radio, public television, podcasts like this one, and everything in between, it's time to make some noise. So on May 1st and 2nd, make a donation of $5 or more to show your public media love, and we'll send you a special Vermont Public sticker pack as a way of saying thanks. Who doesn't love stickers? When you give to us, we get to keep giving you homegoings. So make your gift. Head over to vermontpublic.org/donate. As always, you are welcome here.
My favorite things to do were to go to the east side of Cleveland and go to all the nightclubs and hear Smokey Robinson and, the Four Tops. And I was surrounded by a lot of different ethnic groups. Where I lived, I felt like I was in the best world to be surrounded by so many different diversities.
This is Janice Solek-Tefft. She now lives in Underhill, Vermont. A stark difference in ethnic diversity to Cleveland, but lovely nonetheless. And she's a Homegoings homie, otherwise known as a dedicated listener to the show. A couple newsletters back, I began asking our homies, you all, for episode inspiration. If you knew any interesting people, stories, or topics I should dive into. Janice took me up on it.
And when you said, does anybody, I said, oh man, I am writing this right now.
Janice is curious about something I gather many people are curious about because I've heard this curiosity my whole life. She wants to know more about the lived experiences of biracial people, specifically people whose racial makeup is Black and white, also known as, me.
One thing that was really interesting to me is on the next block from my house, there was a family, and her mother looked white, but was Black, and nobody ever knew that. So that was so interesting to me because I had not known that the whole time I was growing up.
I feel like I try to invite a lot of people on this show to come on, pitch us ideas, ask us questions. What makes you so fearless in asking about race?
I just have always thought, why? Why is that such a hard thing to take a look at? And for me, it's always been so much fear behind it. People are just so afraid. And then when they get afraid, they get angry, and then terrible things happen. And it was just such an important question to ask you. How do you manage? How do you see it? How do other people really go about their life?
Thank you, Janice. I'm here for it. The biracial experience. Yeah, it's about time we had this conversation. From Vermont Public, this is Homegoings. I'm Myra Flynn, and today's episode was inspired by a curiosity from one of our listeners, Janice Solek-Tefft, who wrote to ask us, quote, how do people who identify as Black but have a white parent identify with that part of them? What are the complicated issues, if any? How do you manage day to day? Would you have guests on the show who are biracial? Well, would we ever? To answer this question, I speak with 4 biracial people about what it feels like to hold 2 of the world's most opposing races in one body. I'm one of them. So settle in. We're going to unpack a little history.
It doesn't matter what you physically put out there. That's your history. That's who you are.
A little nuance.
I really try not to split it like this. I try not to split.
And a hefty amount of individual reflection.
Basically being a visitor in both places. Never really home.
This is Homegoings, and this is an episode we're calling Never at Home, the Biracial Conundrum. We're a proud member of the NPR network. Welcome home.
Homegoings has support from Rutland Regional Medical Center, where healthcare equity and access are the foundations to a healthy community. Learn more about their services and locations at rrmc.org. And by the Vermont Arts Council, working to center creativity, art, and culture for everyone throughout Vermont. Learn more about programs, resources, and grant opportunities at vermontartscouncil.org.
Janice's question about the biracial experience isn't a new one. The biracial conundrum is well documented. There's a lot out there about this particular struggle, and this struggle even has a name. It's not a pretty one. It's called the tragic mulatto trope. It's a literary trope, and to understand its offensiveness, you first have to understand the term mulatto, where it comes from, and why its history is so, well, tragic. The term mulatto has been used to describe someone with one black parent and one white parent. In Spanish, this term means small mule, so let's start there. This basically meant that biracial humans were compared to the offspring of a donkey and a horse. This term was widely acceptable all the way through the mid-20th century. I was called it by two of my elementary school teachers. Thankfully, we've evolved, and now terms like biracial or mixed race are the norm. Still, it's interesting to me that we were so inconvenient to the binary way folks talked about race that we got our own name. Now on to the more tragic part. The tragic mulatto trope dates back to 19th century American literature. Sociologist David Pilgrim credits Lydia Marie Child with launching this trope in her short stories The Quadroons and Slavery's Pleasant Homes. The trope almost exclusively focuses on biracial individuals, especially women, light enough to pass for white. But even in most literature, these biracial folks were often unaware of their black heritage. It was a surprise to them. When they did find out that they had a black parent, these characters would find themselves barred from white society and all the glory that came with it. Also, in these literary examples, these characters would turn to suicide. If you ask me, which no one is, but hopefully you know by now, I'm going to weigh in anyway, there are many unspoken tragedies that go along with this trope. For one, it should feel yucky in 2024 to still be talking about people and their bloodlines. The gaze of it all comes from some pretty dark places, like the one-drop rule, a Jim Crow law born from the South enforcing the idea that a single drop of black blood makes a person black. It's also known as the one black ancestor rule, and some courts have called it the traceable amount rule, and anthropologists call it the hypodescent rule, meaning that black and white biracial people are assigned the subordinate race, no matter what, the black race. Something else that's tragic is that these interracial parents we speak of in the 1800s typically did not become parents from a place of equality or even choice. In a lot of cases, the dad was the slave master. The mother was a slave, and the, quote, mulatto was their child, by way of rape. And even as horrific as this sounds, there is still some privilege built in here when it comes to biracial people, because your proximity to whiteness is closer. And depending on how you came out looking when you were born, you may be able to chameleon your way through life, or even pass as white entirely. But even this context is too binary for this conversation, because despite our best anthropological need to stratify and categorize each other, no human experience is a monolith. And how you look is just one piece of the nuanced biracial pie. What about how you were raised? What about how you're treated? So in a lot of ways, I already know the answer to Janice's question about how it feels to be biracial, specifically black and white biracial, if there are any struggles in that story and how we manage day to day. The answer is, there is no answer. But there are stories.
Well, right now my hair is pretty blonde. I have hazel green eyes and my skin's fair. And my hair, I would say texture is closer to being, I would say, more white or, more on the 80-20, maybe a slight wave.
Sandra McCurdy is a colleague of mine in the world of arts. In Los Angeles, California, where I live part-time, she shoots and directs my music videos. And I did this to her. I thought she was white. I was pretty surprised to learn otherwise.
Most people would see me and think that I am Caucasian. So they would think that I'm white. But, occasionally people will ask me what my ethnicity is, but they usually, if they think I'm mixed with something else, it's not usually Black.
Sandra fascinates me because here's a person who, by all intents and purposes, because of the way she looks, has the option to not choose Blackness. But she does. And a lot of that had to do with the Black women who raised her.
Yeah, so I was born in Jamaica, and my mother's Jamaican. My family is Black on the Jamaican side, and I culturally consider myself to be Jamaican because I grew up in Toronto with my mom and my aunt. I didn't grow up with my dad, who was white, so I grew up with Black parents. Whenever I tell people specifically that I'm part Black or I'm Jamaican, they always sort of just, it's not even that they look surprised, they just kind of look through me like they don't understand what I'm saying in a way.
What are you? It's a question I've gotten more in my life than I'd like to admit, from every race, because the way I look, talk, dance, and present doesn't always square with the culturally familiar. No matter where I am, I'm exotic. I think that sometimes, albeit a privilege, this chameleon ability in how we present as biracial folks can also be a superpower. The powerful thing being, you get to teach people a lesson about their assumptions in real time. But sometimes doing that doesn't go over well. Because when you don't align completely with a specific culture or ethnicity, it can feel like a betrayal to the people who do. We do live in a society that wants us to choose our box, physically match our description, and categorize appropriately. But as we know, identity isn't always that neat. In fact, it's pretty messy stuff.
As a teenager, not as an adult, but as a teenager, I had a lot of issues with specifically Black girls in high school, where I actually had less of an issue with white girls in high school than Black girls. So it might be if a Black girl would be upset if a Black boy liked you because they would consider, oh, that person likes you because you're light-skinned.
We're going to hear more of this today, of the Black women in these stories being cruelest to biracial folks or folks with lighter skin. But there's a reason for this, and the reason is called colorism. Colorism is the practice of favoring lighter skin over darker skin, and it's an ugly practice that has reared its head pretty much everywhere over time. During the enslavement of Black people, those with lighter skin tones received preferential treatment, like getting to work in the house instead of the field in the hot sun. And this was often because they were the children of the slave and their master, so they got this privilege. This treatment propagated in our communities, in Black communities, and our treatment of each other. For example, even after slavery, light-skinned Black people formed clubs that catered only to other light-skinned Black people. These were called blue vein societies, and you were only allowed in if you were light enough to see the blue veins in your skin. And then, of course, there's the good old paper bag test, where within the Black community, a literal paper bag was used to determine if someone was allowed to enter churches or fraternities. If you were darker than the bag, you couldn't get in. It is fair to say that in America and across the world, darker-skinned, melanated people are treated worse everywhere. So enter biracial people, who seemingly have a choice to access Black pride or not. That ability to choose doesn't feel good for everyone. But then again, hate doesn't feel good anywhere.
So I did get a lot of, I would say, hate. If I'm honest about it, like for a while, stopped school when I was really young because I would literally have things like bitch written on my locker. People would want to fight me. And I was actually really shy. Didn't have, like I had friends, but I wasn't, you know what I mean? There was no real reason for it other than the fact of my ethnicity. I really, truly feel, I never got beat up, but I would be like physically threatened, like daily going to school. So yeah.
It's a shame that so much is attached to the way we look racially, because it's what's behind our race that doesn't show up just by looking at us, and it rarely gets asked about. There's a lot of history there. In particular, with Black and white biracial people, our existence is pretty radical because there used to be laws against these two races merging, marrying, or procreating. They were called anti-miscegenation laws, and they criminalized interracial marriage and sex as a way to preserve the integrity of the white race. Outside of America, colonization and apartheid did a similar job of keeping segregation alive and well.
It's still colonialism from Jamaica to England, and there's so much racism within Jamaica. Jamaicans in general, because the majority of people are Black, there's a natural, they're naturally proud to be Black and to be Jamaican. But that being said, my great-grandfather was of Scottish descent on my mother's side, and my great-grandmother was full African descent on my mom's side, so her grandparents, and he got disowned for marrying her.
Many of us have these stories in our past. Even if you're not aware, many of you have these stories in your past. But two people eventually managed a political shift in the allowance of interracial love and marriage. Ironically, their names were Mildred and Richard Loving, and in 1958, they were arrested for being married because they were interracial and in love, and living in Virginia. Their case, Loving v. Virginia, 1967, that's right, 1967, reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where their lawyers fought for their love and argued that this law was archaic, harmful, and oppressive. 9 years after their arrest, the Lovings won their case on June 12th. And now we celebrate Loving Day on June 12th in recognition of this love story, which struck down all anti-miscegenation laws remaining in 16 U.S. states at the time, allowing more people like me and Sandra to exist, and the people we've made.
And the other interesting thing is I have two kids, and one is Black and one is white when you look at them. Do you know what I mean? So my son doesn't even look mixed. He looks Black. And my daughter doesn't even look mixed. She looks white. Do you know? So it's an interesting thing too, because I get different reactions when I'm with my children as well.
People's biases and assumptions do a lot of identity shaping as well, because systems are built around biases and assumptions, and by way of those systems, human treatment. So though Sandra remains firm in knowing who she is, how she identifies, and where she comes from, it brings up some thoughts for me around choice, around getting to choose, around the world choosing for you.
I think as long as you're Black, you're Black. As long as you're part Black, people consider you Black. And in my case, it's a little different because I look white, or look more closer to being white. But in that case, I still don't feel like I can choose, because people who think I'm Black, but the majority of people think I'm white in America anyway. So I think that people choose for you in a way, because you can't just say I identify as white. They're gonna be like, no, you're Black. And even though I am Black, people do still look at me like, are you sure? Like, like, I'm not sure I don't see you that way. So I'm gonna see you the way I want to see you. And so no, I don't think you have a choice. I think as long as you're mixed at all, and even if you look mixed, where someone looks at you and said, that person's clearly part white and part Black, I think you're considered Black. I always look at it this way, like just because if you're ethnically something, that's what you are. So it doesn't matter what you physically put out there. That's your history. That's who you are. That's your genetics. So yes, absolutely. I feel like I have Black pride and I connect to it. Be yourself, be yourself.
What is that?
Be yourself for yourself.
For yourself.
Yeah.
Historically, these are the two most opposing races like in our bodies. And so how have you arrived at where you're at with identity?
Firstly, I'd say the question implies an inner split that I maybe felt as a child, but don't feel now. So, but to the point of race, it was perhaps easy to embrace what one would call my white side because my mother was white.
This is Hunter Pay, a fellow biracial Vermonter, among other things.
I'm a musician who finds other creative ways to get paid to do that. So, like a pet sitter also.
Hunter lives in Bradford, Vermont, a town that borders both the Connecticut River and New Hampshire, and a town in a state that is the second whitest state in the Union. To look at Hunter feels a little bit like looking at myself. He's brown-skinned, not so racially ambiguous that he wouldn't be considered black in some way, an assumption which is only reinforced by his head full of dreadlocks. And he's been on my radar for Homegoings for a while now, because he's one of the few black people I've talked to over the years who is brave enough to talk about his blackness as a journey, one he says he was late to arrive to.
I would say it was harder to find my love and pride with my black side because I didn't have a proud black father present. I did not have proud black men around me as we moved up to these New Hampshire and Vermont communities. So in hindsight, it's easy for me to see why it took many years and a long journey to become a proud black man that I feel I am now.
Vermont is a hell of a place to begin your journey toward your blackness because life there is almost pristine. The trees are treeing and the mountains are mountaining until you learn somehow, among all this color in this colorful state, where people actually fly to just witness the multicolored foliage, somehow you're still different.
Oh, I knew I was black young because I was the only me around, you know, and I was treated as such for better or for worse. So, yeah, there was never any mistaking that how I was seen, and so maybe that was the beginning of my embracing who I was. It was tough, though, because when you're a kid, you don't want to be different, right? Nobody wants to be different. They would suddenly say this thing or do a racist joke or something. You know what my path has been? It was a tiny lifetime of not saying anything to those moments. Here's the thing people don't understand. Even at my age, even where we are now, it catches you off guard. You're just going through your day, living, and then someone throws when that race thing comes at you, you know, hindsight, you know what to say, but usually when it happens, the reality is it just catches you off guard. So I have endless memories of just being shell-shocked by whatever the person said all through my childhood.
The silver lining, I guess, in these tragic moments is that sometimes hate and tragedy sparks an internal fire, a quest of sorts to figure out how you're going to respond to this stuff for the rest of your life.
My path has been A, learning how to identify those attacks, but B, learning how to stand up for myself and find a way to meet that moment when it happens. What I see in the news, every black child who is shot in the streets, those are some of the great awakenings I've had in a type of reclaiming my blackness has been through that lens. To see this happen to these people who are me, they look like me, they are me. And as it started to feel like me more and more happening to me, that really had played a large role.
I think we can all say thank you to a man named George Floyd for multiple awakenings. This doesn't make his murder any less than a horror story, but there's something to be said about the shot of cold water we all received and welcomed against the backdrop of old wounds. To put it simply, change seemed a little more possible after his murder. and healing, present company included.
I decided to do the things I loved most and travel the world, and started in Africa. And so Morocco for 5 weeks, and then up through Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Egypt, all the great wonders of the world. And the whole time I knew I'd come back. And instantly when I got to Africa after a few weeks and felt like a human again, I knew I was going to come back to America and be a musician again and record my new album and build the home studio and, do all these things I'd only talked about. And yeah, the healing, the healing came out in the music.
That's the way to where she has made it to, long before the breaking, shortly after, amen. What's strong enough for breaking can be whole again.
My introductions to Black culture were through, my mother would give me these books. She really, as a white mother, in hindsight, I can see, I could tell at the time too, she was really trying to be both parents, but also trying to do what a Black parent might, because we didn't have my father in the picture.
Hunter says his father was incredibly abusive. When he would try to ask his mother about him, she would shut him down. So not only did he grow up without a connection to a Black parent, he grew up not learning much about his Black history. And then more tragedy struck, this time at home. In 2021, Hunter's mom passed away.
Not racially, but globally, like my place in this universe has shifted. And yeah, everything's different now without her.
Seemingly against all odds and in the face of loss and tragedy and racist experiences, Hunter has arrived at his Blackness. Like me, though he's technically biracial, he self-identifies as an African American male, period. And in the end, it took a team of helping hands to get Hunter feeling solid in his Black identity. Literally.
Truly, my first personal meeting of Black culture was in college. And I'm embarrassed to say that out loud. I mean, you're so old when you're in college. I mean, that means it took me 18 years. So I don't feel proud to say that, but it was just my childhood growing up here in Vermont. And I got to Burlington and I was a soccer player. I went from the life I explained to you to living in this giant mansion with, yes, my mostly white soccer team, but also players from Spain and all around the world. And then this completely Black basketball team. And we were suddenly just thrown into a mansion together to live for the year. And it was so beautiful. That is where, I don't know if you can hear the smile in me now, but that's truly where it all really exploded. Because then I went from learning from books and movies and just stories and TV to these were became friends. And the point guard was the guy who was cutting my hair. When I was finally sat in that chair with my Black friend cutting my hair for the first time in my life, I can still hear him looking at me like, all right, we got to fix this up. Get in this chair, you can't go out looking like that, really, they really it felt transformative to have them take me under their wing. And it was a beautiful time.
I unpacked the tragic mulatto trope with Hunter to learn if these days he's had any of that internal battle of the races going on. Or as Janice puts it, what are the complicated issues, if any?
Yeah, I've always felt like I lived in between both worlds. And maybe all of my talk of love is so much easier because my mother was white. But, for the other side, needed more of my work and more of my love because I did not have the Blackness around me. I had to go find it. I was taught some of it, though I really try not to split it like this. I try not to split.
When we come back, we'll talk with someone who's been doing the splits her whole life.
Basically being a visitor in both places, never really home.
That's right after this.
I've definitely been scarred in my life about how I identify.
This is Madison. She lives in Burlington, Vermont, and she identifies as biracial Black. And for her, the feeling of being split between two races is deeply felt.
I was always in the in-between, definitely not white. And I will tell you, white students in the South made sure I knew that, no doubt. But also, the Black kids were like, yeah, but you're not us either, So basically being a visitor in both places, never really home.
Madison has caramel-colored skin, short blondish brown hair, and a curl pattern I would describe as 3A. A little curl, a little wave, not much kink. And she grew up in the South where race has historically been managed in a pretty binary way. So she was managed in a binary way.
When I was 8 years old, we moved from Germany back to Georgia, where I was born as a military kid. And this is in the early 70s. And so they were doing color counts. How many Black kids, how many white kids, to make sure that our schools were being integrated. And my young 20-something white third grade teacher would pick a student in the class to do the count. Well, that wasn't fun for me because inevitably, kind of the class joke was to save me and this little boy, Jimmy, who was also mixed, white mom, Black dad, for last. And the joke would be, what do we count them as today? And so over a bit of time, the teacher basically said to the class that she was going to count me as white. That did me no favors.
This feeling of being racially unhomed continued for Madison when she moved to Vermont, a place we've talked about a couple times now, also where this show is based out of. I also like to think of Vermont as a microcosm for any rural white space. Also a case study, a place to learn more from about the fallout of homogeneity. A reminder that Vermont is the second whitest state in the Union. The Union. And though that's the case, somehow it still thinks of itself as welcoming. In fact, it can be an overwhelmingly welcoming place at times. Because there's a ton of Black Lives Matter signs on people's lawns, but not a lot of Black people. So the state being welcoming, it's tough to trust. And sometimes for good reason.
I will tell you that 2019 was a momentous moment for me. And what I mean by that is I was having dinner with folks in my house. Everyone was white except me. And we were just, I don't know how we got on the conversation of traffic stops, but I mentioned that during a traffic stop, I'd been asked for my social security number. And, one friend said, oh, maybe the cop was having a hard day. I was like, okay. I asked him, do you ask everyone for their social security number? He put his hand on the butt of his gun, took his time, a few seconds, and said, it's at my discretion. And to have the folks around that table not believe me broke me. I'm going to tell you, it did. Until finally, a white man at the table said, are all of you really saying that what happened to Madison had nothing to do with the color of her skin? And then they finally conceded. And then 2020 happened for all of us, right? This brutal gift with COVID, and we were all stopped. Everyone stopped. And so the entire world saw the murder of George Floyd. That's another breaking point. So I had the individual breaking point in 2019 with that conversation. And in 2020, it broke all of us, is what I felt. And so in Vermont, what happened was the LaPorte sisters created a Black women walking group, and this group of us saw each other for the first time. People who had lived here, grown up their whole lives here, had been here for 30 years like me. And we're all looking around like, wait a minute, you guys have been here the whole time? That was a magical moment, a brutal gift, as I say. And then what's come out of it now is we realize, or at least I realize, I'll speak for myself, that a lot of that initial connection was trauma bonding.
Madison brings up a point here that I think about a lot. As I mentioned, I split my time between Los Angeles and Vermont, and though I don't promote sweeping generalizations about communities, I do personally feel a difference in my Black community between the two places. It's pretty simple. In LA, with my Black friends, we don't talk about race. Not because we don't want to, we just talk about other stuff. In Vermont, sometimes it can be all we talk about. And this makes sense, I think, because Black folks in Vermont are a small group, only 1.5%. So we are really working daily for visibility, equal opportunity, and overall change in a state that, while it has the signs up, is so racially homogenous it doesn't have enough context to make the right changes the right way. How do you fight well for someone or something you don't know? When I am in Vermont, the state I grew up in, and a state that I love, I am exhausted. And when I'm with my Black community there, we are exhausted. And someone like Madison, who is fighting for a more nuanced visibility, biracial visibility, in a state that's just beginning to contend with conversations beyond the binaries of Black and white, she's also exhausted. For her, this fight for visibility as a biracial woman who doesn't have to choose a side, at times has left her pretty lonely.
Right? That bond of, okay, everybody in the world sees, you can't tell us you don't know anymore about the racism, about the violence, about everything that we've been trying to tell you has been happening to us. So that trauma bond for this, beautiful group of people. And then when that kind of floats away over time, what do we have in common?
After speaking with all of these folks about their lived experiences as biracial people, I'm realizing that most identity-based episodes sugar down to this. All you have to do is ask. To quote Maya Angelou, when someone lets you know who they are, believe them the first time. But you have to ask about people to learn about people. Madison reminds us, don't be lazy. The individual experience is just that, the individual experience.
The laziness for me is more an intellectual laziness of not even wanting to have the conversation with folks or imagine that someone could move through the world differently than you, right? We are not a monolith. No group of people is, whether you're talking about LGBTQ people, white folks, Black folks, AAPI folks, indigenous folks. There is no monolith. And here you go. I'll say something that may get the hackles up on some people. People are going after Amanda Seales right now, and I'm not here to defend her, but I will say the one thing she said is there's not one way to be Black. That, I will stand on that. There is not one way to be Black.
I have straightened my hair, bleached it blonde, dressed in flannel and Lacoste and, tried on preppy, tried on Western, tried on rock and roll. And never in my life have I been treated white, no matter what I've done. It's never felt like I've been able to pass. What do you think? Am I able to, am I ambiguous in that way?
You're certainly light skinned. I guess I would say you couldn't pass as white, but perhaps not something other than Black, potentially like Latinx maybe.
Yeah, I get Dominican all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that anyone would mistake you for just white.
This is Alicia Carter. Growing up, I knew her as Alicia Poulin till she got married and changed her last name. And we've been on this ride called life together for as long as I can remember.
We met when we were 5 in kindergarten.
In kindergarten. How lucky are we? Who has the same friends since kindergarten?
Yeah. I think about that a lot. Very, very, very lucky.
Yeah. What's our secret, I wonder? I don't know. I don't know if there is a secret. You just
What is that special sauce? I'm not sure. Because we're so awesome, maybe.
We were awesome. I mean, at least we thought we were. We had these things called laughing attacks together, and we were those kids who liked to annoy people on purpose. Don't ask. For the most part, people saw us as this inseparable duo. Alicia and Myra became Alicia and Myra. We were a pair. So close, in fact, that at least as kids, we never really recognized our racial differences. And I'm talking with Alicia today because Janice also asked about me, my experience. It's only fair when it comes to untangling the web of racial identity, and I'm here to give my answer. I think it's a good thing to put hosts on the proverbial chopping block sometimes.
I don't think that I necessarily noticed it most of the time. We were having our laughing attacks and, being annoying to people, and you were just my friend. It wasn't, I'm white, you're black.
Just because Alicia and I didn't notice each other's differences didn't mean some people didn't take notice.
I think it was on the bus, and a kid called me the N-word. And I'm assuming that's because I was with you, and I don't recall witnessing that many situations like that, but that stuck out, like, oh, okay, that you are perceived as being different by this person, or me by association, I guess. For the most part, I didn't think about it until things like that happened.
For me, believe it or not, as a kid growing up in central Vermont in a sea of white people, I never really thought about my race either, because I was a kid. I had a black mom at home who I looked like, and my white dad was never asking me to split my bloodline over cartoons and pancakes. It wasn't until things like this happened, until someone made it a point to make sure I knew I was different. It was always unexpected. It was always in some place where I couldn't escape, like the school bus, or the classroom, or soccer field. And eventually, it happened so often that the feeling of being different stuck, seeped into my self-esteem. I'd be lying if I said I don't still deal with some of this today. But as I've mentioned, home helped a lot. I did have cultural affirmations of my blackness served up to me daily. And fortunately, those also stuck. What kind of sense of blackness did you see or feel or smell or whatever it is in our house?
I would say her cooking.
Alicia is talking about my mom here. Shout out to Mama Mathis.
She cooked amazing foods, but things that my mom didn't cook, different foods that I didn't grow up eating. And that the food was probably the smells of her cooking. Your mom's such an amazing cook. And I know that you cook the same way. When you make spaghetti and the sauce that you make, you don't just buy sauce. That sauce has been cooking for 8 hours at least.
Back to the tragic mulatto trope we spoke about at the start of this episode. I think one of the most harmful things about this trope, whether literary or in reality, is this notion that no matter what, as biracial people, we will never be settled in our identity. One of the most hurtful things I ever heard growing up was from somebody's grandmother who was our friend. And she told our friend not to hang out with me because I was probably confused. And I remember that, it was a little easier to be called the N-word because my mom always taught me, an insult is an insult depending on who it's coming from. And the people who were calling me things like that had their own stuff going on. So it was kind of easy to just be like, all right, that's some hateful stuff. I'll put it over there. But when somebody says you're probably confused, that stuff sticks with you. Have you ever experienced me as being racially confused?
I don't think that I have viewed you in that way. I think because you did grow up in such a predominantly white area that exploring your black side was something that as you got older, I think you dove into a bit just because growing up in Brookfield, Vermont, everywhere you look, everybody's white. That's the culture is just there on display. I've seen as you went to college and got older that you were kind of trying to connect with that lineage a bit more. And now, as an almost 40-year-old woman, it seems to me that you hold your Blackness more confidently.
Good for me. That's great.
First impression, I was like, who is this girl? She is like loud. She is just like bubbly and ready to meet people, you were just eager to meet people, mix and mingle, and just make new friends.
Alicia said above that college was a place where I got to explore my Black lineage. She's not wrong, except I think the word explore suggests an inherent sense of welcome into the world you want to explore. When it came to the Black women on campus, let's just say that welcome wasn't automatic. We talked about why earlier: colorism, privilege, the ability to chameleon. I represented all of these things. So life was a little lonely until I met this Black woman.
So Naomi Desom Mercado, I know you because we went to school at Dickinson College together, and I live in New York City. Well, Long Island now, I should say. Not even New York City. New York.
Yeah, I guess you got to differentiate now.
Especially you don't have to pay them city taxes. Woo, child. Listen.
I've missed you.
Same here.
Racially, college was a tough place for me. Not really because I felt like I was doing the splits or was unhomed, but because I was starving. I was starved for Black closeness. At times, I wanted it more than life itself. But I was awkward about it. There's no way not to be. I learned the hard way that you can't just walk up to people and say, "You're Black, I'm Black, we're friends now." And I was also often trying to hide how starved I was. How sometimes I'd lie awake at night in Vermont praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in, to bring friends who cooked like my mom, who knew what to do with my hair, who also grew up on Luther Vandross and Anita Baker. Instead, I bumped into some life lessons I'll never forget about sisterhood and the sacredness of Black trust.
So most of the Black kids that were there were inner city kids that didn't really deal with a lot of, white students. So them being there is we kind of clung to ourselves a little bit. And then there were a couple of students that were biracial, and most of them did not even want to deal with the Black kids on campus. They didn't. They were like, "Oh no, you're just too Black for me." And they just mostly hung out with the, white students and so on and so forth. But you were in the middle of both, because sometimes they'd be like, "Oh, how do you know this song?" It's like, dude, my mom used to listen to jazz. My mom listened to the blues. What do you mean? How do I know this music? And it was the questions. Oh, the questions. That was the worst part, because people were like, "Oh, it's asking you, oh, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why don't you do this? What is any of your business?" To me, I was just like, "What is any of your business?" That was the interesting thing, because it shocked people that you like soul and R&B. It's like, dude, what do you mean? To you, it may not have seemed best of both worlds, but to other people, they're like, her hair is so long and soft. It's like, come comb it, please. Come wash it. Because I be having some trouble. Come help me,
You combed my hair all the time and braided my hair all the time. You know it.
To other people, they'll be like, "Oh, she has it easy." It's like, nah, man. Go. She broke a couple of combs. Don't be fooled by those curls. She broke a couple of combs too. Okay? So just relax. Because there was a lot of chattery. People will always talk behind your back for unnecessary reasons. I think it was not confusing, but it was stressful for you. I don't think you wanted to choose, but people forced you to choose. You know what I'm saying? Depending on which group you were with.
Do you think I chose?
No. I don't think you chose. I think you stayed true to who you were, and you stayed true to the road that you wanted to follow, despite what other people may think. I see you as strong, beautiful, and powerful. And I say powerful because you tap into the questions and the needs of both communities, not just, Black women or white women, just women. You don't look for that differentiation, you know? So you just are yourself and you empower. And especially, you know, you have your daughter that you're raising. I see her. She's like bright and bubbly, just like you know, and she's also strong-minded, like, I'm going to do this, just like her mama. So, you know, when it comes to that strength and that, you know, no holds bar, I'm going to do what I need to do, you have that, you know, and I'm proud of you because it took you time to build that, because so many people in the world were like throwing different things at you and it made you question so many things about yourself. But then it had to be a time where Myra had to just be, hey, I'm going to silence the world. I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on the great women that were around me, your grandmother, your aunts, you know, and your mom especially. And then, you know, you coming to have some of my friends here that are also, you know, young Black women. And you're like, you know what, like, this is sisterhood. You know, this is camaraderie. This is what support systems look like. Black is beautiful and proud. And like I said, you're so, from the person that, you know, 5+ years ago that I knew, we ain't going to disclose the age now, is a remarkable young woman now that, you know, continues to blossom, continues to flourish, and allows, you know, young Black girls like her daughter and my daughter to see that there's versatility. You don't have to be one mold, one cut. Different flowers for different people, and they bloom at different times.
Sandra McCurdy, Hunter Pay, Madison, and my longtime friends Alicia Carter and Naomi Dizome. Thank you for trusting me with your stories today and for sharing your thoughts on some of mine. As you know, here on the show, we typically offer you a deep listen to one of the artists in the episode. Today, that artist is Hunter Pay, who wrote this song titled Burning at Both Ends about this very subject during a tender time.
She takes one drag to remember, takes one to forget. That's the way to where she has made it to, yeah.
Listen to the full song at homegoings.co. And thank you so much for listening to Homegoings, a righteous space for art and race. It's been a pleasure being here with you. Special thanks to all who made this episode happen, like Janice Solek-Tefft, who wrote in with such a great question, our Vermont Public Data journalist, Corey Doxer, Hunter Pay for the great music we used throughout the episode, and my mom, Martha Mathis, for digging up a photo of me from high school. You can check out that awkward photo at homegoings.co. Also, I'm going to begin hosting some community conversations with you all once a month on Instagram Live, because we should talk about some of this stuff together, right? We're calling them Deep Dives, and our first one will take place Thursday, May 9th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Give us a follow on the gram at We Are Homegoings to talk out the biracial conundrum with me, share your experiences, and ask me anything, really, about the show and my reporting process. This episode was mixed, scored, and reported by me, with help from our associate producer, James Stewart. I also composed our theme music. All other music by Hunter Pay and Blue Dot Sessions. Saeed Tijan Thomas Jr. edited this episode, and Elodie Reed is the graphic artist behind our Homegoings artist portraits. I'm front and center on this one, with 2 photos of me. One with straight blonde hair, and one with my favorite kente cloth head wrap. Check it out at homegoings.co. While you're there, you can sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter. See you in 2 weeks for another episode where I'll speak with a pretty heavy hitter in the world of hip-hop, whose life and fame came to a crashing halt at the height of his career, literally. If you have thoughts, reflections, or asks of me as your host about who we should talk to or what we should explore next on the show, write to me at hey@homegoings.co. I always write back. As always, you are welcome here.
Shortly after, amen. What's strong enough for breaking can
Hi, it's Terry Gross, the host of Fresh Air. We bring you in-depth, long-form interviews with actors, directors, musicians, authors, journalists, and more. Listen to our Peabody Award-winning Fresh Air podcast from WHYY and NPR.